Okay, so remember when we're teaching phonemic awareness that we're not just looking at isolated phonemes or sounds, we're also looking at syllable awareness, identifying the number of syllables in a word. Oftentimes kids will clap the number of syllables. Word blending, blending words to create compound word like back and stop. And remember, if it's phonemic awareness, you're just dealing with sounds, you're not dealing with a written word yet. Blending syllables to create a word like s and ter to make sister. And finally, blending onsets and rhymes. So let's take a look at onsets and rhymes. Let me put this into view mode. So when we're talking about onsets and rhymes, we're talking about within an individual syllable. The onset is the consonant at the beginning part of the syllable. The rhyme starts at the vowel and goes to the end of the syllable. Remember that every syllable in English has to have a rhyme, but not every syllable has an onset. The reason why we like to teach onsets and rhymes is because vowels and vowel sounds are much more regular and predictable than individual vowels. For example, if I take the rhyme at, the at family, when you see AT, it's 99% of the time going to be the long A sound. If you see an A standing alone, it could be a multiple of different sounds. Also, onsets and rhymes are sort of the natural psychological chunk in a syllable. It's much easier to identify onsets and rhymes than break it down into smaller phonemes, so these would be naturally come first before teaching individual phonemes. And finally, rhymes, R-I-M-E-S. Notice there's a distinction between that and the word rhyme, R-H-Y-M-E-S, like in a poem. So rhymes are the same as word families, are the same as phonograms. Okay, some examples are if you took a word like skate, the onset would be the SK cluster, and the rhyme would be the 8 word family. In the word bat, the onset would be the B, and the rhyme would be at. In the word ice, there is no onset, there's no initial consonant sound, and there's just the rhyme ice. So if a multiple syllabic word like napkin, that's going to have 2 onsets and 2 rhymes, and the word escape will have only 1 onset in the second syllable. There's a rhyme in the first syllable, and then an onset and rhyme in the second. Alrighty, so looking at the relationship between phonics and phonemic awareness. Phonemic awareness is a prerequisite to learning phonics. Kids will be able to make sense of phonics and that letter-sound correspondence if they understand that words are made of smaller sounds. That just makes sense. We can pair phonemic awareness with phonics instruction. For example, once kids have learned the sounds of the onset and rhyme, like in bat, b plus at, remember when you see those little 2 lines, that should trigger a bell in your head to think phonemic awareness and sounds, because those are the lines that linguists use to identify that now we're just talking about the sounds of letters, we're not talking about the letters themselves. So when we've taught them the bat, but, at sounds, then we can show them a picture of a bat and the written word as well. Alrighty, so now let's start looking at phonics. Okay, so looking at phonics now. This is the ability to associate sounds and letters. It is built on an understanding of phonemic awareness that words are made of smaller pieces, and also known as the alphabetic principle, like we said earlier. So when you first talk about phonics, it seems odd to talk about sight words because sight words are not phonetic. You cannot sound them out. You have to memorize them because they don't follow any of the phonics rules. There's no possible way of decoding them. So oftentimes high frequency words, which are words that are used very frequently, such as of and the, are sight words, and also words that have unusual or irregular spellings like dove or ocean. They can also include words that children really want to know, like dinosaur, or words introduced in content area lessons like butterfly. Okay, so using word parts to decode can be helpful, like using morphemes, the smallest unit of meanings, to decode and find the meaning. We can have kids identify roots, prefixes, and suffixes. Structural analysis is much the same way, also looking at base words and compound words, and syllabic analysis, recognizing words based on their syllables. So some common phonics patterns that you really need to know are the digraphs. There's consonant digraphs where two consonants make one sound, like the PH in phone, or SH in fish, or CH in chip. Then there's consonant blends, and that I always find confusing. You can also call them clusters, where two or three consonants are side by side, but you still hear the distinct sound, like the PL in play, or SPR in spring, or the NT in spent, and also the SP in spent. And then, of course, vowel digraphs are when two vowels make one sound, like the rule, when two vowels go walking, the first one does the talking. Diphthongs is also a vowel pattern. It's like a glided sound made by the oi or the ow. So oi or oy, like in oil and boy, or the ow or ou in loud or cow. And R-controlled vowels, these are vowels that lose their distinct vowel sound because they're followed by an R. So it's hard to sound them out. You know, if you hear the word girl, it's going to be hard to know that that's an I in there because it could be a U or an E or anything else. And then L-controlled vowels, I find, are less... The L doesn't work as strongly as the R, so usually you can still hear the vowel sound in most L-controlled vowels. But they are identified as a phonics issue, so you should know them. Okay, and then using syllable patterns. Sometimes if kids can identify a syllable pattern, that will help them understand how to decode the word, how to pronounce the vowels. So the VC combo is a short vowel followed by a consonant. The CVC is a consonant, vowel, consonant, typically short vowel sound, like in man or in pet. CVCC typically has a short vowel sound, like in cost or fill. CCVC, also short vowel, often can begin with a consonant blend, like brat or clap. CVCE is the consonant, vowel, consonant, silent E sound. Typically it's a long vowel sound, but there's lots of exceptions. So like home and huge are examples that follow the rule, and love and live and give and have do not. So one year on the RICA they had a question, which consonant pattern, which syllable pattern is always a long vowel sound? And of course this is the wrong answer. My guess would be the CVE, like ice or ate, which I can't think of it. There aren't that many examples anyway, and any ones I can think of are long vowel sounds. Then there's a CVVC, consonant, vowel, vowel, consonant pattern, like read and sleep, and almost always a long vowel sound, but not necessarily. Like in read, the past tense of read is read, which is short vowel. Finally, CV, consonant, long vowel. I'm thinking those are always long vowel sounds too. So that question never showed up again. I'm guessing that was one of those practice questions that they never actually used on the test. Okay, so that pretty much covers phonics. And I'm going to have you pause here and go back to that chart and think about some strategies that you think are significant for teaching phonics specifically. So we'll pause while you fill in the chart. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about spelling. And remember, spelling is developmental, and it's important to understand that because oftentimes you'll have parents. Spelling is one of those things that people are really attached to, and I think it's because it's so visible, it's so obvious. When there are spelling issues, we can really see them, and people feel very threatened about that. And also we often judge people by how they spell. So it is important, but it's also developmental. So what that means is, just like there are reading stages and developmental reading stages that we can identify, so it goes with spelling. And if you can help a parent identify that their child is in a particular spelling stage and that they're moving towards the next one, I think that will take some of the edge off. So spelling development, there's the pre-communicative, where there's really no understanding that letters represent sounds. Kids might just be squiggling or drawing pictures if they've seen writing modeled. And then we move on to the semi-phonetic. There's an attempt to use letters to represent sounds. Knowledge of sound-symbol relationships are poorly developed. And by the way, Gunning has a good discussion of this. And you can also refer to your friendly Ready for RICA book to look at some spelling information. Then there's the phonetic, where their letters represent sounds, and there's pretty much a one-to-one correspondence of every sound in a word. Transitional means kids are close to conventional spelling, They understand most of the regular patterns in English, the phonemes, the onsets and rhymes, the diphthongs and things, and all sounds are represented, and most of them are correct. And then, of course, conventional, where most of the spelling is correct most of the time. When we are teaching spelling, there are some things to keep in mind. We can differentiate the number of words per child, so it doesn't have to be 20-word lists for every kid once a week. As a matter of fact, that would be way too many. It's ideal if you can look at patterns. So if you're teaching kids spelling of, say, the IGHT word pattern and ITE word pattern, so the long I sound, using those two, you could have a group of words with one spelling and a group of words with another, and maybe have kids sort and match and look for patterns themselves before you actually tell them the patterns. You could teach high frequency words and content area words, so things in the science or in the math or in history. And of course, words that relate to each other like synonyms and antonyms. The ideal for spelling practice is that pre-test, self-study, and then retest. For example, the spelling flip chart that we used in 462. And of course, any multisensory techniques, if you can include visuals and colors. Teachers sometimes will draw shapes around words, like up on their word wall. Have auditory practice, kinesthetic things, maybe for creating their spelling words. I think we talked about in 462. They could have letters cut out of sandpaper and let them manipulate the sandpaper shapes into a spelling word. You could have stamps where kids stamp letters on stamps and they stamp their spelling words. I saw a classroom where they had parents cut out letters from cereal boxes, and kids had to find the letters and glue them on to make up their spelling words. It looked a little bit like a ransom note, but it was great because it also had them where they had to identify different fonts, because sometimes in a different font the letter looks a little bit different. So getting more tactile, getting more hands-on with spelling is great. You could have learning centers where there are stamps and spelling practice things too. Okay, so take another couple of minutes and fill out your chart for some spelling strategies.